the tutorial, what we're going to do is to select the markers that we have in our actor and attach them onto the skeleton. So that way the bones will move depending on the position of the markers. It's called creating solving constraints. Let's do it. So we have our skeleton here, and what we're going to do is to select the markers and then pressing Shift and Control, drag them onto the part of the body that they will be creating the constraints. So if we start with the head, actually let me make sure that we have our selection set only to the markers and the solving bones. Perfect. So we select the markers, and then pressing Alt and Control. There we go. And then pressing Shift and Control, we're going to drag those markers onto the bone. There we go. Okay, and you might be thinking, well, why aren't you using the aerial marker? It's very simple. The aerial marker tends to be placed in a different position every time, right? Whereas these four markers are always in the front head, left and right, and at the back head, left and right. So the aerial, some people tend to put it to the right, or sometimes to the left, a little bit forward, backwards, and it doesn't actually contribute to anything to the solver. It does contribute to the labeling setup, but we don't really need it for the solving setup. That's the reason. And then moving down, we're going to constrain our clavicle bones. Select the two markers and then pressing Shift and Control, drag them onto the bone. And you can see the bone get selected and the cursor shows an arrow explaining that we're performing an operation that's different from the usual drag and drop. Oh, yeah. Let me Control Z that because I had selected the other markers first. So let me clear the selection and now I can select them again. Select those two, Shift Control and drag to the markers. Sorry, to the bones. Okay, select here and here, Shift Control and drag the bone. Select here and Shift Control to drag to the bones. And we proceed that way to create the constraints of the rest of the markers. Now, something that you might notice is that these lines here might not be visible. So if that's the case for you, all you have to do is simply go into your attributes and select your solving constraints, right, or one of them, and then make sure that you have here this button selected so that it affects all the changes to that specific module. And then here where it says draw constraint offset, make sure that you have bone lines selected. That way you can visually see where the constraints are. And the last two markers from that hand are these two. And Shift and drag to the hand. Perfect. So now we have the head and the left arm with all the constraints. Now I'm going to keep doing this, but I probably forward this part so that you don't get bored. Now for the root, what I'm going to do is select those 6 markers and add them as well. I'm going to skip the spine for now, but then I'll come back to it in just a moment. So I wanted to pause here because this part is actually very important. So if we look at the markers here on the waist of our actor, those 6 markers are constraining the root bone of our skeleton, of the solving skeleton. And what we're going to do next is to have those 6 markers also constraining the 3 bones of our spine. This one, and this one. Now you may ask, why would we want to do that? Well, the reason is because in a future step, we're going to give weight to those constraints. And that way, if we give weights to the constraints, we can actually tell the system that despite these markers constraining this weight and this weight and this weight, they will be constraining them with different values. And what we're going to do is actually also have these markers here constraining these 3 spine markers. And we're going to give an average of the movement of the markers from the top and the markers from the bottom to each one of those 3 bones. So let me explain that better. The markers from here at the top are going to have more impact on the bones that are here at the top and not so much for the bones that are here at the bottom. And the same for these markers. If we put it in terms of values, these markers will affect this one's more 75%, this one 50%, and this one 25%. And the same for this one. This one will affect this bone by 75%, this one by 50%, and this one by 25%. So let's add those markers. Okay, and there we go. Now the next step is to constrain those bones with these markers here. And now let's constrain the chest to the markers from the back and the front. And actually, I believe these 2 markers could constrain this bone as well. There we go. And we'll do the same for the neck. And that's it. That is the end of creating constraints and attaching the markers to the bones.